Not all healing is visible. Some of it happens behind closed doors. In the moments where you're crying alone, but still showing up for your kids like everything's okay. Some of it looks like getting through the day and calling that enough. Hey there, and welcome to Momma Drama and Trauma. I'm your host, Jenny Kimmel, and today I want to talk about the kind of healing that isn't always seen. Sometimes healing doesn't look strong, inspiring, or like some big breakthrough moment. Sometimes healing looks like crying alone in your room and then getting up to make dinner. It looks like breaking down in private and still showing up for your kids. It looks like surviving the day and calling that enough. And I think that's the kind of healing people don't talk about enough. Because the truth is, some of the deepest healing happens quietly, behind closed doors, in the moments no one sees, in the moments where nobody is clapping for you, nobody is checking in, and nobody really understands how hard you're fighting just to keep going. This episode is about that kind of healing, the kind that happened in the middle of regular life. The kind that happened while I was still functioning, still parenting, still trying to hold it together. The kind that probably looked fine from the outside, even when it absolutely was not. So today I want to talk about the healing no one sees, the hidden work, the private grief, the tiny steps forward, and the quiet ways I was slowly finding myself again, even when I didn't fully realize it at the time. What healing really looked like, day to day. If I'm being honest, in the very beginning, healing didn't look like healing at all. It looked like emotions all over the place. It was constant crying, constant missing him, constant trying to figure out how we even got here. It felt like an emotional roller coaster that I couldn't get off of. I just wanted everything to go back to normal. I didn't want to deal with this. I didn't want this to be my life. It was a daily struggle. And I don't say this lightly because it didn't feel like it at the time, but each day did get a little bit better. It just didn't feel that way when I was in it. When I was in it, it felt like the days dragged on forever. Like I was just stuck in this nightmare and I wanted it to end. I didn't want to do this anymore. It was hard and it wasn't pretty a lot of days. That first month, it was minute by minute. 1 minute I could be okay-ish, and the next minute I was in tears, sobbing, completely emotional, just an emotional wreck. I do think some things helped, even early on. About a week in, at the suggestion of my husband, I started going for daily walks. And at first, those walks weren't anything big. They were just a way to get out of the house, get some fresh air, and try to breathe through what I was feeling. Sometimes I would just walk in silence. Sometimes I would cry. But it became a small outlet for me, even in those early days. And I remember one day I was outside cutting the grass, listening to an audiobook. It was Self-Love, a Workbook for Women. And I remember thinking, my gosh, my husband should listen to this. He really needs this book too. And that right there shows you where I was at. Because even in the middle of everything, I still had hope. I still thought maybe we could figure it out together. And I do think it was hard on him. I truly don't think he wanted to hurt me. I think he wanted me to heal and get better, but he didn't want to be a part of that. He would say things like, maybe I'll check that book out, but he never did. Because I think deep down, he already knew where he stood, even if he was trying to gently let me go. Looking back now, I can see something really clearly. Even in the beginning, I was trying to heal myself, but I wasn't doing it for me. I was doing it for him. I thought if I could just get better, maybe we could fix it. During the day, I could keep myself busy. Mornings were getting the kids out the door. During the day, I kept my routines, errands, chores, being outside, lawn maintenance, keeping our business going. Then the kids would come home, dinner, sports, practices, I was still showing up. But at night, that's when it hit the hardest. When I came home and it was just me in our bed and he wasn't there anymore. So many nights I cried myself to sleep. And so many mornings I would wake up and for a second think it was just a nightmare. I would reach over and realize it wasn't. He was gone. Eventually, I created a nightly routine. I would go upstairs, get into bed, light a candle, and journal everything I was feeling. Because I couldn't keep it all inside. I couldn't always control it. I could be in the middle of a store or out to lunch and just break down crying. That wasn't like me, but I couldn't stop it. I remember going to Dr. Christie and breaking down immediately. Same with Dr. Denise. I was an emotional wreck. Outwardly, I was functioning. Inwardly, I was falling apart. And I did feel like I had permission to fall apart sometimes, especially around my mom. She felt safe. It felt safe with her. I could just let it all out. But at the same time, I knew I had to keep going. Fall apart if I needed to, but then get back up. I made myself get up every morning, get dressed, get the kids out the door, because I knew if I didn't, I wouldn't survive it. And I remember calling him one day, crying and needing him. And he kept telling me he needed to get back to work. And I remember thinking, what about me? I'm over here falling apart and all you care about is work. And that was the hardest part. He was my person. And suddenly I was relying on the person who hurt me for comfort. And I think that's when something really started to shift for me, even if I didn't realize it at the time. Because if I couldn't go to him anymore, then I had to figure out how to keep going anyway. So what did showing up look like? Getting up, getting dressed, keeping going. Because if I stopped, I didn't know if I could start again. The lowest moments no one saw. If I'm being honest, the lowest moments for me were probably in December, right before Christmas, around Carson's birthday. That was my roughest time. I was struggling, and I remember getting into an argument with one of my kids. I don't even remember exactly what it was about, but I remember the words that came out of my mouth. I said, maybe you should just go live with your dad. And the second those words came out, I regretted it immediately. He got upset. He left. He had his license at that point. He had just turned 16 that September, and I was just an emotional wreck. I don't know if it was Christmas. I don't know if it was everything being so different, but I was not okay. I remember tracking my son's location, and I went to find him. And when I pulled up, my husband was there, and I remember thinking, doesn't he see what this is doing to all of us? Doesn't he care? Because at that point, it had been a few months, and I was still barely holding it together, and it felt like he didn't even care. And I know that might not fully be true, but that's what it felt like. It felt like I was falling apart. And he had already moved on emotionally. And I remember sitting in my car. I had my mom and my sister on the phone, and that was the moment I said it out loud. I can't do this anymore. I don't think I'm going to get through this. And I meant it. That's how low I felt. I had moments like that more than once. There were so many times I would go into my closet, close the door, and just sit there and cry. That became my place because I felt like my kids couldn't hear me in there. If I needed to fall apart if I needed to talk to someone on the phone, if I needed to say things I didn't want them to hear. I went into my closet, closed the door, and just let it out. Those were the moments no one saw, and the thoughts in my head during that time. They were loud, constant, relentless. The biggest one was, how am I going to support my kids? I hadn't worked outside of our business in almost 20 years. I had been taking care of our family, our home, our business, and suddenly I was supposed to figure out how to support all of us on my own. At 46 years old, how do you go out and get a job making decent money when you haven't been in the workforce like that in almost 2 decades? That thought scared me more than anything. I kept thinking, how am I going to do this? How am I going to survive? How am I going to keep me and my kids afloat? And I would go back and forth. Should I go back to school? But then I would think, how am I going to pay for that? Do I really want to take on loans at this stage of my life? Do I want to be paying that off for years? It felt like there was no clear answer, just fear. And then there was the other fear, losing the life I thought I was going to have. That one hit just as hard. I had a picture in my head of what my life would look like. Growing old together, traveling, living in our home on land. And suddenly, that future was gone. And I couldn't even picture what was next. I just knew it wasn't going to be that. And that was terrifying. There were also moments where people would say things like, "You're so strong. You're holding up really well. I'm proud of you." And I know they meant well. I really do. But inside, I didn't feel strong. I didn't feel okay. I didn't feel proud. I felt like the life had been drained out of me. And I remember thinking, if you could see what I feel like on the inside, you wouldn't be saying that. One of the other moments that stands out to me was my birthday. New Year's Eve, my husband's brothers and their wives took me out to dinner, and I'm so grateful they did. They didn't want me to be alone on my birthday, but sitting there, it felt off. There's a picture of all of us at the table, and I remember looking at it and thinking, someone's missing. He was always there, always. And for the first time, he wasn't. And I just felt like the odd one out, like I didn't belong in that moment anymore. And then there was that Christmas. His dad and stepmom came in like they always did, and they still included me, which meant a lot. But he wasn't there, and that made it feel so wrong. Because he was always there. I remember being on the verge of tears the entire night, just trying to hold it together. And then something happened with the kids and their cousin, and I couldn't do it anymore. I pulled my kids aside into another room, and I lost it. I started crying, and I couldn't stop. I told them, "Get your stuff, we're leaving." And it was awkward for everyone. And I remember driving home, crying, thinking, this can't be my life. This can't be how this ends. This can't be our story. But it was, and that was part of my first holiday season without the life I thought I would have. And those are the moments no one really sees, the moments where you're not strong, you're not holding it together, you're not inspiring, you're just trying to survive something that feels impossible. What barely got me through? If I'm being honest, nothing really fixed it. There wasn't some one thing that made it better. It was more like there were small things that helped me get through one more day. And sometimes that was enough. One of the biggest things for me was walking. And I'll be honest, I didn't want to at first. The first time I went for a walk, it was probably around 4 in the afternoon. I put Maisie's leash on and we just went. It wasn't a long walk. It wasn't anything big. It was just getting out of the house, breathing in fresh air, trying to remind myself I'm still here. I'm still alive. And over time, those walks got longer. Eventually, we were walking about 2.5 miles a day, but it didn't start that way. It started as survival. Sometimes I would cry during those walks. Sometimes I would just walk in silence. Sometimes I would listen to podcasts or books about healing, betrayal, trying to figure out my life. And there were moments where my head would finally feel a little clear. I couldn't journal while I was walking, but when something would come into my head that I needed to get out, I would pull out my phone and speak it into my notes because I didn't want to keep it inside. Journaling at night also became a big part of my healing. I created a routine, coming upstairs, getting into bed, lighting a candle on my nightstand, and just writing everything I felt, everything I thought, everything I didn't know what to do with. It helped me get it out of my head, out of my body. Instead of those thoughts just repeating over and over, I could release them. There were even times I was writing letters to him, asking questions I would never get answers to. How could you do this? What were you thinking? How could you be with someone else while we were here waiting for you? I wasn't holding anything back. And I think that's what helped. It helped me process. It helped me release. It helped me stop carrying everything inside my body. Because when you hold that much in, you can feel it. The tension, the weight, and writing it out helped me let some of that go. My mom, she was another huge part of what got me through. And the thing is, she didn't have to say anything. She didn't have to fix anything. She just was. She has this way about her where just being around her feels safe. I could fall apart around her. I didn't have to hold it together. I didn't have to explain myself. She just sat with me, listened to me, let me say whatever I needed to say. She never told me how I should feel. She never told me I shouldn't feel something. She never shut me down. She just held space for me. And that was exactly what I needed. And what made it even harder was that we had just lost my dad 8 months earlier. So she was grieving too. And for her, it was like losing a son. She truly loved my husband like the son she never had. So this wasn't just my pain, it affected all of us. But even in her own grief, she still showed up for me, and just her presence helped me feel safe. Dr. Christy and Dr. Denise, they also played a really big role. They didn't judge me. They didn't silence me. They didn't tell me I was wrong. They just guided me. I really believe they were placed in my life at that exact time to help me get through something I didn't think I could. I remember laying on Dr. Christie's table one time, and the entire time she was working on me, I just cried. My head was in that little face cradle, and tears were just running down my face. I couldn't stop. And she just kept saying, "Release it. Let it out. Just release it." And I did. I sobbed. I couldn't control it. But it was like I was releasing it out of my body. And as painful as it was, I think it helped me. And Dr. Denise, she had a different role. She would listen and then ask questions that made me think. She helped me understand where I was, why I was there, how I got there, and how not to stay stuck there. They both help me in different ways, but they both help me move forward. And then there were the little things, the things that might not seem like a big deal, but they mattered. Being outside, feeling the sun on my face, breathing in fresh air, sometimes just sitting on my porch, listening to the cicadas. I remember the summer of 2024. They were so loud here in St. Louis, and I would just sit outside and listen. And for a moment, it felt peaceful. Music was another big one for me. Music has always been therapy for me. It takes me back to every season of my life, from being a little kid at my grandparents' house, to singing songs with my friends in the car, to songs that remind me of my kids. Forever Young by Rod Stewart, that one always gets me. And during that time, music helped me feel what I needed to feel. If I needed to cry, I played the sad songs. If I needed to feel strong, I would play something that lifted me up. Music met me where I was, and routines, they mattered too. During the day, I just kept going. I followed my routines, did what needed to be done, almost like if I kept moving, I wouldn't completely fall apart. And in a lot of ways, that's exactly what it was. None of these things fixed it. None of these things took the pain away, but together, they helped me. They got me through one more day, and then another after that. And sometimes that's what healing looks like. Not getting better all at once, but finding just enough to keep going. Learning to feel safe on my own. If I'm being honest, I think I used to be scared to be alone, and I didn't really realize that at the time, because technically, I was alone a lot. When my husband used to travel for work for 6 to 7 months out of the year, I was home, I was raising the kids, I was doing life. But there's a difference between being physically alone and being emotionally alone. Back then, even when I was by myself, there was still this sense of us. There was still someone I belonged to, someone I could call, someone I was building a life with. So I never really had to sit in being truly alone. And then everything changed, and I was alone for real, not just physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. And I think at first, that's what scared me the most, because there was no backup anymore. No we, no safety net, just me. And I didn't know if I could handle that, but somewhere along the way, that started to shift. And I don't even know if there was one big moment. I think it happened slowly, quietly, in the middle of regular days, days where I was still showing up for my kids, still doing what needed to be done, but inside, I was breaking, crying when no one was around, holding it together when they were, trying to make sense of a life I didn't choose. And then, somewhere in all of that, I started to notice something. There was peace, small at first, almost hard to trust, but it was there. I realized that when I was alone, there wasn't chaos. There wasn't tension. There wasn't that constant emotional pull. Everything felt calm. And if I'm being really honest, there was a part of me that liked that. Because when I'm alone, I can control my environment. I can control the energy in my space. There's no walking on eggshells, no wondering what version of someone I'm going to get. It's just peace. And over time, that peace stopped feeling unfamiliar. It started feeling safe. And then eventually it became something I craved. Now, if I'm being honest, I think I actually prefer being alone. Not because I don't want love, not because I don't want a relationship, but because I've experienced what it feels like to have peace in my life, and I'm not willing to give that up for chaos ever again. I still want to share my life with someone someday. I do. But that person, they have to match my energy. They have to match my nervous system. I can't be with someone who lives in overdrive, who brings constant stimulation, who feels like emotional chaos, because I've done that and I know what it costs. What I want now is different. I want calm, steady, and safe. I want someone who doesn't disrupt my peace, but adds to it. And I think that's part of the healing no one sees. From the outside, it might look like I'm just alone more, that I'm keeping to myself, that I've pulled back. But the truth is, I'm not isolating. I'm protecting what I fought really hard to find. I didn't just learn how to be alone, I learned how to feel safe in my own life. And maybe that's what healing actually looks like sometimes. Not becoming louder, not becoming stronger in a way people can see, but becoming someone who finally feels at peace in their own presence. The small signs I was healing. Looking back now, I can see that healing didn't happen all at once. It wasn't some big moment where everything changed. It was small, quiet, almost unnoticeable at the time. I think the very first thing that changed was the crying. I didn't cry the whole day, and that might not sound like a big deal, but at that time, it was. Because in the beginning, I was crying all the time. So when I had a day where I didn't cry the entire day, that was something. It was small, but it was a shift. Now, don't get me wrong, I was still doing things like checking his phone records, checking social media, still trying to make sense of everything, but the crying, that started to slow first. There were also moments that surprised me, like when I started trying to be strong in my own way. I remember at one point I blocked him. And if I'm being honest, part of it was because I couldn't take it anymore. And part of it was probably me thinking, fine, I'll show you. Which sounds silly now, but that's where I was at. And then there was the moment when I filed for divorce. Our divorce was officially filed October 31st, Halloween. But I had started the paperwork weeks before that, and I remember waiting for it to be filed. Checking, waiting, like I just needed it to be done. Because at that point, if he didn't want to be a part of my life anymore, I didn't want to stay stuck in that in-between. I didn't want to drag it out. I didn't want to stay in limbo. If he was out, then I needed it to be over. And I'll be honest, there was still a part of me that hoped maybe this would wake him up. Maybe this would make him realize what he was losing. But at the same time, I knew I had to do it. And when I did, I was proud of myself because filing for divorce meant admitting that my 24-year relationship was over. And that's not something I ever wanted, but I did it anyway. And that was a sign of healing, even if I didn't see it that way at the time. I also started to notice small moments of calm. Music was still a big part of my life, but it felt different. It wasn't just about getting through the moment anymore. It was something I could actually sit in and feel. And then when spring of 2024 came, I remember creating a space for myself. Around Mother's Day, the kids and I cleaned up the porch. We power washed everything, got all the winter and pollen off, and I added little things. Curtains, lights, a little speaker, and I turned it into this space that felt peaceful. And I would go out there, sometimes with a glass of wine, sometimes with a book, sometimes with my journal, sometimes just to sit. Sometimes the kids would come out and join me, and we would just sit together, listen to music, talk, and those moments, they helped me more than I even realized. They gave me space to breathe, to think, to start figuring life out again. I also started turning inward instead of outward, and I think that really started after my trip to Chicago with Dr. Christie. That experience, it shifted something in me. I started thinking about myself, believing in myself, telling myself, you can do this. You don't need him. You've done this before. You're going to be okay. And slowly, I started to believe it. That's when I started looking at my future differently, considering real estate classes, going through mediation, standing up for myself, standing up for my kids. And even though there were still moments where I hoped he would come back, I was also starting to build something without him. And I think by that summer, something really shifted. It stopped being about him, and it started being about me. I stopped checking everything, stopped watching what he was doing, stopped carrying things that weren't mine anymore. And I started focusing on me, my kids, and our future. And that was a big shift. I also started trusting myself again. That started around February when I realized I've already done this before. When he was gone for work, I handled everything. I can do this. And over time, that trust in myself grew. And then about a year later, when I started doing marketing work and helping in the real estate office, that's when I really started believing in myself again. I started thinking, I'm good at this. I like this, and I can do this. And that's when I really started finding myself again. And something else that changed that I didn't even realize at the time. I started setting boundaries. I started pulling back. I stopped feeding into things, stopped reacting the same way, and I started asking myself, what do I need right now? Instead of looking to him for comfort, for answers, for anything, I started learning how to give that to myself. And that was powerful, realizing I can take care of me. I don't need someone else to do that. I'm capable. I'm strong. I've always been strong. I just had to remember that. And I think that's the thing about healing. Sometimes you don't see it while you're in it, but when you look back, you realize it was happening all along. In the small moments, in the quiet shifts, in the ways you kept going, even when you didn't think you could. If you're listening to this and you're in the middle of something that feels heavy, overwhelming, or like it's never going to end, I just want you to know you're not alone, even if it feels like no one sees what you're carrying, even if it feels like you're just barely holding it together, that still counts. That matters. That is healing. And if this episode resonated with you, you might want to go back and listen to episode 3 of the podcast, week 2, Hope, Denial, and the Unraveling of Trust, where I talk more about that stage of still holding on, still hoping, and what that really felt like. I would also love for you to follow and subscribe wherever you're listening. When you follow and subscribe, it helps this podcast reach other people who might need to hear this too. You can also find more support, resources, and everything I'm building at www.mommadramatrauma.com. And come connect with me on social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, all at Momma Drama and Trauma. I share more real moments, reflections, and healing content there as well. And soon I'll be sharing more about the Healing Circle, which I'm really excited about. As always, you are strong, you are worthy, and your story matters. Until next time, take care of you.